The Eurofighter Typhoon is a multi-role jet fighter designed and built as part of a joint venture by a number of European nations. Join me in this video as I build and review the Airfix plastic scale model kit of this versatile and capable aircraft. Hello and welcome to Model Minutes. Today's video is a build and review of the Airfix Eurofighter Typhoon kit in 1/72 scale, which comes as part of a starter set. Before we start the kit, as always, remember that adult supervision may be required due to the use of sharp tools and toxic paints and chemicals. Airfix recommends this kit for those aged 8 years old and over. So let's take a look at the kit. The starter set comes with some exciting box artwork and the painting and decal placement instructions on the rear of the box. It's worth noting that a flying hour token is included, which can be redeemed for more kits if you're a member of the Airfix Club, so it's worth cutting that out to keep. The set comes with 6 paints, all Humbrol acrylics, a small tube of polycement and 2 brushes of different thicknesses. Inside the box you get a bag of components, an A4 instruction booklet, an Airfix Club leaflet and a set of water slide decals. The decals consist of a single small sheet and are printed to the usual good standard we have come to expect from Airfix. The instructions are printed inside an A4 booklet, which features step-by-step drawings, some information about the real Eurofighter Typhoon, and safety warnings regarding the use of the paints and cement. 5 grey plastic sprues hold the majority of the parts, whilst a single clear plastic one contains the canopy parts. The 60 or so pieces that make up the model seem well moulded, with many of the larger parts of the aircraft coming in as few parts as possible, which will definitely help with the ease of construction. Having done a little research on this kit, it was first released in 1990, and as a result the parts are a little simple and lacking the finer details of more recent releases from Airfix. That being said, however, they do benefit from being cleanly moulded with little to no flash being present. Whilst we're looking at the kit, the included paints consist of Humbrol Acrylic 11 Silver, 33 Matte Black, 130 Satin White, 165 Medium Sea Grey Satin, 166 Light Aircraft Grey Satin, and 167 RAF Barley Grey Satin. I do use a couple of extra paints as the build progresses and will mention them at the relevant times. So moving on to the construction of the model. The first step I chose to complete was to wash the plastic parts in warm soapy water. The instructions recommend you do this in order to remove any oil or grease left over from the moulding process. This will help give the cement and paints a better surface to stick to. Once clean, they were left to air dry. I didn't use any cloths as this can put dust or fibres on the model and spoil the finish. When the parts were completely dry, I then started painting the pilot with the included number 165 paint. Next, I painted the internal parts of the cockpit, including the pilot seat, console and the insides of the fuselage with number 33 matte black, not forgetting the boots of the pilot too. I then moved on to start assembling the front canard of the aircraft. These are the little wings right on the nose of the plane that help give it greater manoeuvrability. The parts were cut from the sprue using a sharp knife and any burrs were then cleaned up using a nail file. If you are careful with the construction and installation of this part, it can be made to move up and down, but I'm not too worried about that as it's going to end up sitting on my shelf. Small dots of polycement were used to bond the parts together, and they may need holding in place until it sets. The cockpit parts were then assembled, repeating the process as before, removing the parts from the sprue and cementing them together. As they had already been painted, some paint needs to be scraped away from the bonding surfaces in order to ensure the parts cement together correctly. The upper and lower parts of the fuselage were then cut from the sprues and cleaned up. I tested the fit to see how well they would go together. Before cementing these two halves together, the cockpit assembly needs to be glued inside the top half of the fuselage, pushed up from underneath. Due to the tricycle undercarriage of this aircraft, the model required weight in the nose to prevent it from sitting on its tail whilst on the ground. The instructions called for 5 grams of ballast, so I weighed out some old coins to see how many I would need in the nose. As you can see, I settled on 3 coins, which would ensure the model stayed upright on its landing gear. I then glued the coins inside the bottom half of the fuselage, as far forward of the main landing gear as possible, using a general purpose glue. The canards that were previously assembled can then be added in the correct place, followed by the top half of the fuselage, which is cemented into position. I used a clothes peg to hold the parts together until the cement had cured. Smaller parts were then added, including the refueling probe and wingtip pods. These pods come in 2 halves and need cementing together before adding to the wings. The nose cone and the tail fin can then be added, all fitting into place well with the minimum of fuss. The air intakes needed a little cleaning up with a knife in order to get them to fit into place properly. These were then followed by the jet exhaust nozzles, which again needed a little attention from a knife in order to remove a little bit of excess plastic. Having already painted the air brake bay with the included 130 paint, I then added the air brake in the extended position. It is possible to add this part in the closed position if you would prefer. I then assembled the landing gear parts. They do go together well, but are a little fiddly, so some tweezers might be a useful tool at this point. I decided to paint these parts after installation, but in hindsight I wish that I'd painted them beforehand, as that became quite a difficult task to get a neat finish. The option to depict the landing gear raised is also included, but I decided to build mine with the wheels down. Once added to the model, they provide quite a sturdy base. Looking at the parts, I thought they might be quite fragile, but they are tougher than they seem. I then added the weapons pylons to the bottoms of the wings, but decided to keep the missiles off until they had been painted. I did, however, add the drop tanks, which came in 2 parts, as they were to be painted the same overall colour as the rest of the aircraft. Next, I began painting the model, using the included 167 RAF Barley Grey satin paint. I thinned it with a little water and brushed it all over the model, taking care to avoid the areas that had already been painted, such as the cockpit and air brake bay. The paint was thinned in order to avoid leaving brush strokes when it dries, but it will require a number of coats as a result. Whilst you watch me finish this step, I'll tell you a little about the real Eurofighter Typhoon. Development started in 1983 as a joint venture between the UK, Germany, France, Italy and Spain. Due to disagreements, France eventually left the group and went on to design the Rafale instead. Following delays due to political and financial issues, the first flight of the prototype didn't take place until March 1994, and further developments and delays resulted in the first aircraft entering RAF service in 2007. Originally conceived as an aerial supremacy fighter with excellent dogfighting capabilities, it now also incorporates ground attack and reconnaissance roles due to the changing demands of the modern battlefield. The Typhoon has a maximum speed of Mach 2 or 1,550 miles per hour and a range of 1,800 miles. The aircraft features a single 27mm cannon and various hardpoints for drop tanks, air-to-air, air-to-ground, free-fall and guided bombs, as well as other electronic aids and warfare packages. The aircraft that Airfix have chosen to depict in this kit is that of Typhoon F2 of 17 Reserve Squadron at RAF Coningsby in 2007. With the base colour complete, I then touched up any areas that required the 130 satin white paint, such as the air brake bay, wheel wells and wheel hubs. You might be able to notice that I've already painted the nose cone with Humbrol 165. The jet exhaust areas were painted with number 11 silver, taking care as I did this by hand. I also painted the legs of the landing gear with the same colour. The wheels were painted with the included 33 matte black, but as I'd already installed the landing gear, this became a bit difficult. The exhaust nozzles were then painted with Humbrol 53 gunmetal grey, which is not included in the kit. The missiles were painted on the sprues using the included 166 paint, with 130 for the nose cones and 165 for the fins. The cockpit canopy was painted using the included 167 paint, and it took a couple of layers to get a good even finish. I then moved on to masking the areas that required highlighting in 165 paint. These were the leading edges of the wings, tail and air intakes. I used some masking tape to ensure that I would get a nice straight and neat edge. The paint was then brushed onto the correct areas. When dry, the masking tape was removed, leaving a good straight line of that colour and adding some extra detail to the paint finish. An acrylic satin varnish, Humbrol number 135, was then thinned with water and added to the model in the areas that were to receive the decals. This base coat would help give a good surface for the decals to stick to, whilst also preventing the silvering that can occur on a more matte finish. When the varnish was dry, the decals were cut from the sheet and soaked in warm water to help release them from the backing paper. Humbrol decal fix was painted onto the areas that were to take the decals. The decals were then slid from the backing paper and into the position on the model. The decal fix helps soften the transfers into the surface of the model and make them appear painted on. More decal fix was brushed on top of the decal to help with their adhesion to the surface of the kit. The next step was to add the missiles. I'm using Tamiya extra thin cement at this stage rather than the included tube, as the Tamiya version has a little brush applicator which helps with more precise positioning of the required cement, and I wanted to avoid any stray blobs from ruining the paint finish I'd already achieved. Care should be taken at this stage, as the missiles may need holding in place whilst the cement cures to prevent them from hanging to one side and looking wonky. Next, I thinned some Humbrol matte varnish number 49 enamel with some white spirit at a ratio of about 3 parts thinner to 1 part paint. This was then brushed over the majority of the model to help give it an even finish and help blend the decals into the paint scheme. I felt that the overall satin coat was too shiny and it needed dulling down a bit. When that layer was dry, I then used Citadel non-oil black wash on the recessed details of the model, painting the wash on using a fine brush. The only areas this really applied to were the moving surfaces on the wings and tail, as the majority of other details are raised rather than recessed. When that coat was dry, I used some acrylic thinners on a cotton bud to remove the excess wash, working in the same direction as the airflow the aircraft would experience in flight. The previous enamel matte varnish coat of paint helps protect all the previous layers of acrylic paint from being removed at this stage. The final step in the assembly of this kit was to add the cockpit canopy, which I did using a general purpose glue, in an attempt to prevent the plastic from fogging up and looking cloudy, which polycement has a habit of doing. A landing gear light is also included, which I used the same glue to adhere it to the front landing gear leg. And that's as far as I went with the build of this Airfix Eurofighter Typhoon starter set in 1/72 scale from Airfix. I'm quite pleased with how it turned out. I feel that it's quite a suitable subject for a starter set, as it's easy to build and goes together well. The paint scheme is simple too, which would help build up the confidence in a newer modeler. I do think that the detail is quite simple however, especially compared to newer kits in the Airfix range. But for a model that's nearly 30 years old, it results in quite a good representation of the real thing. Retailing for £19 in the UK, I feel this price is a little expensive given the simplicity of the kit, but for those of you who remember, I got this kit as part of my £20 mystery bag, which also included other items, which made this a better deal. At the time this video was made, the kit was not in production, but was available to pre-order on the Airfix website, so I'll add the link to the website underneath. Stocks from the previous batch of this kit may still be available in shops and online from other sellers however. So, in conclusion, this is an easy and fun model to build, which would be great for any new or returning modelers, but might be a little simple and lacking in detail for those who'd like a bit more from a kit. That being said, it would make a great basis for a detailing project. At the end of the day though, I'm quite pleased with the results I've achieved with my Airfix Eurofighter Typhoon starter set. As always, let me know what you think of my build, techniques and finish model in the comments below. I'm also keen to hear your suggestions as to other kits that you'd like to see me build on my channel, so feel free to post that too. All that's left to say is thanks for watching this video, and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe and click that notification button in order to see more content and help support the channel, and feel free to share this video with your family and friends. Don't forget that you can connect with me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook. See you all again next time.